Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here today. Even if I can't join you in person, at least I can join you virtually. So I'd really like to thank the OHCHR for the opportunity to share this message with all of you. Um, Asset recovery and human rights is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. So I'm very excited to be able to address all of you on the topic. I was asked to talk about the obstacles to the repatriation of funds of illicit origin to the countries of origin, challenges identified at the different stages of the process of repatriation. And so, for the sake of this discussion, I thought I'd divide up the asset recovery process into three different stages. So, identification of assets, investigation, prosecution, and then finally the trial stage and the enforcement of sentences. So I think if we start in the obstacles in the identification, I just want to say that proceeds of crime by the mere nature of criminal activities are meant to be concealed, and therefore identifying these assets held overseas is already a big challenge. Um, I think at the very, very center of of this stage and why this is so difficult is we're oftentimes going to find the opacity in beneficial ownership information. The United Nations Convention Against Corruption and the FATF have mandated a number of measures that have to be put in place and if done effectively should support countries in addressing this challenge. The FATF has even updated more recently their recommendations on beneficial ownership transparency after years and years and years of scandals and leaks to the press on how criminals were still able to hide their ownership of legal entities and arrangements. So this is a huge step, but I think we can still do better. Many countries, I would say most countries, have opted for the implementation of registries of beneficial ownership information. But the challenge that we're finding in this route and the solution is that the we're still facing a challenge in the veracity, accuracy, and currency of the information that is included in these registries. The This takes a lot of resources. It takes knowledge, and I'm not so sure that we are still doing a great job at ensuring that the information that is held by the registries is truthful, accurate, and current. It's going to be a challenge to address in the coming years. Also, the availability of this information to law enforcement agencies that is mandated already. It has to be quickly accessible to law enforcement information, but ideally, I think we need to see this information uh, being available as well to civil society. Civil society does a great job at overseeing, oftentimes overseeing these politicians and politically exposed persons, and so having this information available to civil society would really support the efforts of transparency. I also was thinking that we could draw some lessons from the tax world and look at what the Global Forum has put in place for the exchange of tax information, automatic exchange of information among jurisdictions. If I have a citizen of or a resident of your jurisdiction and they hold accounts in my jurisdiction, immediately if we have an agreement in place, I should be able to automatically send you that information for tax purposes. So why not look at what has been done in the tax world and think about what could be done to support beneficial ownership transparency in this exchange of information. Very closely related to beneficial ownership information, we can also talk about politically exposed persons and ensuring consistency across the board and who are PEPs could be a good start, and also implementing appropriate asset and liabilities disclosure mechanisms in countries would be a huge, huge step forward if countries had that information available as well to law enforcement agencies and hopefully, ideally, as well to civil society. During the investigation itself, the legal frameworks that we are finding are still not adequate sometimes. We have several types of confiscation options that not all countries have adopted yet, and even when certain confiscation mechanisms have been adopted, sometimes we find that there are issues to be ironed out. So having adequate legal framework for confiscation is still challenging. And then also the ability to impose preventive measures on these assets is a huge necessity in many jurisdictions as well. Because if we can't put in place preventive measures, then there's no assets to be recovered at the end; they will be dissipated. Of course, pursuing asset recovery as a national policy and ensuring that parallel financial investigations are started from the beginning is still challenging. And then the establishment of the causal link between the asset and the criminal activity is also challenging still in many cases when countries have difficulty proving that causal link. This is going to impact as well the way in which mutual legal assistance is implemented. So mutual legal assistance continues to be an obstacle, oftentimes because countries are not requesting assistance correctly, but also oftentimes because of the lack of political will of the requested countries to support mutual or to provide mutual legal assistance. Asset management is something that we don't normally talk about, but we really need to start talking about this more often. Star Initiative just published a book in December of last year on asset management. It's a guide to practitioners. And this is very important because if we don't preserve these assets during the investigative and trial phase, then there will be nothing to recover at the end. So we really need to start paying attention to asset management. And then in the enforcement of sentences, especially foreign judgments, we still find that the disparity in the legal frameworks continues to be a challenge. For example, countries that have confiscation orders that are based on non-conviction based asset forfeiture and want or request countries that don't have this mechanism in place, that it's not part of their legal system, and they want this country to recognize these confiscation orders, will oftentimes find it difficult for those other countries to recognize their confiscation orders simply because of the disparity in their legal frameworks. So that's something else that needs to be ironed out. The more countries that adopt the various mechanisms for asset recovery, the better. But also, even when countries can't adopt a certain type of mechanism, if there were ways in which we could at least recognize foreign confiscation orders, would also support the effort. And asset sharing continues to be an issue as well, simply because assets sometimes are expensive to maintain. Countries want to be able to recover the cost of maintaining those assets, and that becomes a challenge when it comes to sharing of these assets. Finally, I just want to bring up that we recently published a book on victims of corruption. It came out in December of last year. The UNCAC Article 35 is very clear that state parties should take measures to grant standing to entities and persons who have suffered damages as a result of an act of corruption. We still need to give content to this article. And this publication, all it wanted to do really was to start the conversation, set the problem, and we have found through the publication a number of recommendations that we expect state parties to follow up on. So we're recommending that countries should enable the participation of victims in criminal proceedings. We have expropriated victims from the right to be included in criminal processes that ultimately are related to acts of corruption that affected them. And we are asking, or we're recommending, that the victims are brought back in, and that their rights are recognized as well in criminal proceedings. Many countries have not adopted measures to ensure that victims are also party to the criminal processes, and that their voices are heard, their opinions are listened to through the criminal process. At the same time, enabling the participation of victims in non-trial resolutions is important. We see that in settlements, for example, victims' voices are oftentimes not heard. We need to bring the victims back so that we can listen to their concerns and ensure that they can be compensated for the damages that they suffered. We also recommend that countries should take into account the nature of corruption damages and consider diffuse and collective damages as well. Oftentimes, acts of corruption will have an impact on the enjoyment of rights. And so, how do we compensate victims that have been affected in their enjoyment of rights? So, this is where diffuse and collective damages come into place. And then finally, we have found that there are measures that could be taken beyond legislative and policy frameworks that could have a positive impact in the compensation of victims. Simply making information available for civil society and victims so that they know what are their options and their recourses. Um, how do they start a process, a legal process, which will lead to compensation? Have there been any such processes in their countries that they can draw lessons from? So, being able to access cases that have already been decided on, and of course, being able to access the legal resources that exist, so that they can also have their voices be heard, and they can look for the reparation of damages. So just the access of information would already be a huge step forward. So, countries need to figure out how are they going to bring the victims back into the processes so that they can be compensated for acts of corruption. And I think we're just at the beginning of this conversation, and I very much look forward to having a broader and deeper discussion on this topic. I think I'm already over my time. So I'd like to thank everybody for your attention, and once again thank the OHCHR for inviting me to participate today. And I look forward to continuing this conversation in the future. Thank you very much.